Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be sharing some quick-fire quotes on Mrs Birling from An Inspector Calls. But first, let's just remind ourselves of who Sybil Birling is and what she stands for. Mrs Birling is a snob. She believes that Eva Smith and girls of that class deserve bad things that happen to them. Additionally, Mrs Birling is completely in denial. She doesn't believe her son Eric has a drinking problem, and she can't believe that her daughter's future husband has had an affair. She is extraordinarily confident. She does not respect the inspector at all. As the play unfolds, Mrs Birling remains unsympathetic. We learn that when Eva visits her charity for help whilst pregnant, she is turned away by Mrs Birling. And finally, Mrs Birling does not show any remorse for the death of Eva Smith. Our first quote from Act 1 is said by Mrs Birling to her husband. Reproachfully, she says, "Arthur, you're not supposed to say such things." Through the stage directions, Priestley unveils to us she doesn't approve of her husband and his comments sometimes. The adverb reproachfully signals her dismissiveness of his ideas. The fact she recalls what is supposed to be said highlights again her social superiority and her understanding of etiquette above her self-made husband. Priestley draws our attention to her well-bred traits and her small-mindedness from the start of the play. Our second piece of evidence comes from Act 2, where Mrs Birling unveils that she met another Mrs Birling who brought shame to her. Yes, I think it was simply a piece of gross impertinence, and naturally that was one of the things that prejudiced me against her case. The use of the adverb simply really shares her brazen snobbery with the audience, and as if that weren't enough, she refers to the situation as gross impertinence, which actually heightens her status as quite the caricature of the judgmental rich in Edwardian Britain. More than that, though, the phrase prejudiced me against her. It highlights how Mrs Birling genuinely believes her views are legitimate. She has a very confined sense of morality, and to her, a poor girl who's pregnant deserves to be judged. Also, the use of the adverb naturally seems quite judgmental if that wasn't already conveyed to us. Priestley shares here the irony. Mrs Birling is meant to be helping on a charity committee, yet all she seems to be doing is helping make the inevitable doom of Eva's existence fade ever more fast. Our final quote comes from Act 3 after the inspector has left. She says, "I was the only one of you who didn't give in to him." Instantly, there's quite the competitive edge to her words. The phrase "only one" accentuates how important it is to her that she was right. The contrast of the first person, I, to the second person, more direct address, you, amplifies her self-importance and, frankly, her self-righteousness. More than that, she pins it to the wall with the phrase "didn't give in." She's heightening here how the other characters seem incredibly weak to her. By referring to the inspector as him, I feel that Priestley is doing something quite telling here. If Priestley used the inspector as the voice of reason, her words are more alarming. She wouldn't accept him. She didn't give in. She wouldn't accept his views. That really heightens her sort of definition as a close-minded, difficult, and frankly obnoxious woman who will not share what views others may have to enlighten her. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar?